We begin with a story that has sent shockwaves through Europe and beyond. A story unfolding right now across the Russian capital. Moscow has been plunged to darkness after what officials are calling the most powerful coordinated strike on Russian soil since the beginning of this conflict. Class missiles and swarms of unmanned combat drones have ripped through critical infrastructure, igniting massive fires and crippling the city's power grid. Districts are without electricity. The skyline of Moscow, normally a symbol of control and stability, has been transformed into a silhouette of chaos and flame. Tonight stands as the epicenter of a historic and deeply unsettling development, one that will almost certainly reshape not only Russia's internal narrative, but the broader geopolitical landscape as well. A matter of minutes, a city long seen as untouchable was struck with precision, force, and symbolic intent. The Flamingo missiles, long-range tactical weapons, along with coordinated swarms of drones, analysts are already describing as the most powerful and synchronized assault on Russian soil in decades. Shockwave was not just physical, it was psychological, political, and deeply strategic. The capital, a metropolis of nearly 13 million people. Chaos as explosions echoed through the night sky, lighting the horizon with a fiery hue that has not been seen since the days of World War II. Eyewitnesses described the moment the first explosions hit as unreal. It began with an eerie silence by a deep rumble that grew into a rolling thunder across the skyline. Then came the blinding flashes, followed by power outages cascading through entire districts. The hum of Moscow's neon lights vanished. Streetlights went dark. The metro lifeline of the city came to a standstill as stations plunged into blackness. Mobile networks faltered, eerie sense of isolation among millions. In that moment, Moscow's symbol of power and endurance was rendered vulnerable, its armor of invincibility. The attack was more than a military maneuver. It was a statement that pierced through the myth of Russian security that has been carefully built and maintained for decades. Inside Russia's Ministry of Defense were quick to issue statements claiming that most of the incoming drones had been intercepted. Yet, at least 7 separate impact zones, it became clear that the defenses were overwhelmed. The sophistication of the assault, the timing, the angles, the precision. Flamingo missiles to possess advanced radar, evading capabilities, were launched in waves that coincided with the drone swarms. The drones acted as decoys, air defenses to expend munitions, while the missiles struck key infrastructure moments later. It was a tactical choreography unlike anything Russia has faced in this war. The military dimension lies a story that cuts much deeper. The story of perception and power. For years, Mir Putin has built his domestic authority on the premise that Russia, and especially its capital, is impenetrable. Tonight, that illusion lies shattered. The very heart of Russia's governance, wealth, and influence has been breached. Hit not just physical infrastructure, but psychological confidence. A confidence that has sustained the Russian narrative both at home and abroad. Kremlin's command centers went into immediate lockdown while state television struggled to maintain its usual tone of defiance. There was hesitation, sign of uncertainty, visible even through the controlled optics of state broadcasts. Intelligence agencies are already dissecting every second of this event. The speed, range, coordination of the strike suggests not a rogue operation, but an organized, well-planned campaign. An external actor or an internal sabotage network remains unclear. But one fact stands undeniable. Managed to strike Moscow with precision tools that bypass the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world. Military embarrassment for Russia. It's a message to global powers that no city, no matter how fortified, is beyond reach. The human toll is also beginning to surface. Emergency sirens have been wailing across the capital, with hospitals reporting dozens of casualties from falling debris. Fires, videos emerging from civilians show people huddled in underground shelters, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of cell phones. The fear is palpable. For many younger Russians, first time experiencing war in their own capital, a terrifying reversal of roles for a nation accustomed to projecting power outward. That fear doesn't disappear easily. As the night deepens, the images coming out of Moscow are unlike anything seen in recent history. Polartsklein columns of smoke rising over the Moscow River, emergency vehicles weaving through debris-filled streets, and yet chaos. There's also a strange silence from the top. Putin has not yet appeared publicly. The Kremlin's usual confidence is missing. What remains is a haunting sense of uncertainty, the feeling that something irreversible has begun. For observers across the world, feels like a turning point. Not just because Moscow has been hit, but because it was hit in such a way, clean, coordinated, symbolic, and devastating. World has entered a new era of warfare where technology and timing outweighs size and strength. The old rules of deterrence have been rewritten. Tonight, Moscow's lights have gone out, and in that darkness lies a new kind of vulnerability, one that no missile defense system can fully protect against. May fade, the fires may be extinguished, but the message they carry will echo long after the smoke clears. Moscow, the fortress city, has been breached. Of untouchable powers is over, and the world is watching how one of its greatest capitals grapples with the reality of its own fragility. Just another chapter in conflict. It is a turning page in history, one written in fire across the skies of a city that once believed itself eternal. Through Moscow were not random acts of aggression or desperate attempts to instill fear. They were deliberate, methodical, precise. Each target appeared chosen with surgical calculation, suggesting not chaos, but choreography. The pattern of destruction revealed intent, the nerve center of Russia's power structure piece by piece, to paralyze its ability to respond, expose the limits of its control over the most critical elements of its infrastructure. These weren't just explosions. They were signals aimed at the very arteries that keep the Russian state alive. As the night unfolded, emerged that multiple substations along Moscow's energy grid had been hit within seconds of one another. Ignited rolling blackouts across wide portions of the city, the industrial sectors on the outskirts to the glittering commercial towers at its heart. The loss of power rippled outward, taking with it communications networks, transportation systems, and command relays. In a city so dependent on digital control, light and signal felt like a collapse of order itself. The air defense radars that once formed Moscow's invisible shield went dark, cutting out completely. The attack was designed not merely to destroy, a calculated attempt to render the capital disoriented and uncoordinated in its most vulnerable hours. Analysts observing from abroad were quick to note that the choice of targets followed a pattern recognizable from modern hybrid warfare doctrines. The city indiscriminately, the attackers appeared to have mapped Moscow's strategic lifelines, its power grids, surveillance nodes, communication channels, and struck them with pinpoint accuracy. This was not just about causing damage. It was about disrupting Moscow's ability to perceive and react. The sensors and communication hubs that connect the military's operational brain to its limbs effectively decapitated Moscow's situational awareness for a capital that prides itself on control. Sudden blindness was both humiliating and terrifying. Within minutes of the first impacts, emergency channels were overwhelmed. It came in of fires at energy plants, communication blackouts across several districts, and intermittent outages affecting even government facilities. Civilians described seeing drones dive toward their targets in synchronized waves, some exploding midair as anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. Unnerving accuracy, flames rose from industrial parks, while downtown Moscow descended into eerie darkness. Constant hum of power, traffic, and movement was replaced by sirens, silence, and confusion. And yet, destruction lay in even more unsettling revelation. Whoever orchestrated this knew exactly where to strike. Intelligence insiders suggested that the attacks demonstrated a level of inside knowledge that would be nearly impossible to achieve without access to classified data or advanced surveillance capabilities. Work of random insurgents or amateur hackers, this was professional, high-level warfare. Has trajectories and impact points suggest the attackers were targeting not just the machinery of Moscow's defenses, but the psychology of its leadership. To hit a power plant is to cut electricity. To hit 7 in perfect sequence is to cut confidence. The symbolism of those targets can't be ignored. Radar systems represent the eye of the Kremlin, the instruments through which the Russian government monitors both domestic and foreign threats. struck so cleanly, silenced in seconds, sends a devastating message that even the most fortified systems can be dismantled from the sky. Similarly, the targeting of the financial district, the gleaming towers of glass that stand as monuments to Russia's wealth and power, felt like a deliberate attempt to pierce the illusion of stability. Fire against glass, chaos against the skyline. It was as though the attack sought to expose the fragility beneath the facade. By the following morning, satellite images revealed the scope of the devastation. Entire blocks near the city's power distribution zones had been reduced to smoldering wreckage. Scale of the precision was breathtaking. No wasted firepower, no collateral scatter. Everything about it suggested preparation, intelligence, superiority. And Western analysts described it as a textbook case of coordinated infrastructure warfare, the kind designed not to conquer territory, an opponent's capacity to govern, to turn Moscow inward, to make it wrestle with its own paralysis before it could even think of retaliation. Inside Russia was as fragmented as the grid itself. Local officials scrambled to reassure residents that the situation was under control. Footage of raging fires contradicted their statements. Lines at gas stations stretched for miles, banks reported outages, and ATMs went dark. Just the physical damage that mattered. It was the psychological impact. For decades, Moscow has projected itself as a fortress city, the instability that plagued its borders. In a single night, that myth evaporated. Outages were not just electrical. They were symbolic of a deeper power failure, one that could not be fixed with generators or cables. As the hours passed, the city's silence became its own kind of message. The absence of light and communication left Moscow's residents in a suspended state, answers that never came. Yeah. Emergency broadcasts urged calm, but the tone betrayed unease. Done more than destroy, they had demonstrated knowledge, reach, and audacity. Whoever orchestrated them had shown that they understood how to hurt Moscow without firing a single bullet at civilians. The power plants, the radars, the command centers, these were not mere facilities. They were the pillars of state authority. And now, one by one, they had fallen into darkness. In the cold that followed, as smoke drifted across the skyline, it became clear that the attack was a statement of precision and purpose. Simply an assault on structures, but on certainty itself. It proved that in the modern age of warfare, it's not just measured in missiles and manpower, but in how quickly the lights can go out in a city that once believed they never could. Illusion of invincibility surrounding Russia's defense systems has long been central to the Kremlin's narrative, a fortress mentality woven into the very identity of the state. Years Moscow projected confidence that its capital was shielded by one of the most advanced multi-layered air defense networks on Earth. 400's Panzer systems, the newest iterations of radar, locked interceptors formed what the Russian military proudly called an impenetrable dome. Yet, on this night, that dome cracked wide open. The Flamingo missiles and accompanying drone fleets didn't just slip through the defenses. They dismantled the myth of them. A few minutes, the world witnessed the collapse of a narrative that had been years in the making. The Kremlin's shield, its pride, its deterrent, was exposed as a fragile illusion of control. As the first waves of drones entered Moscow's airspace, should have triggered across a web of radar stations encircling the city. But analysts later reported a stunning silence across those early warning systems. Arrays appeared to have been blinded moments before impact, either jammed electronically or struck directly in precision attacks that took them offline. Military operators realized the scale of the assault. It was already too late. The Flamingo missiles had cut through the sky at supersonic speeds. Unpredictably, their trajectories designed to confuse traditional interception algorithms. 100 units stationed outside the capital responded, sluggishly firing off interceptor missiles that detonated harmlessly against empty air. Marketed as the world's most reliable shield was, in that moment, reduced to confusion and guesswork. The scene inside Moscow's main defense command center reportedly bordered on chaos. Screens flickered with red alerts, radar blips multiplied, communications channels were jammed with conflicting reports. Years under simulations of Western-style missile threats found themselves facing a pattern unlike anything they had prepared for. System analysts believe specifically to exploit blind spots in Russia's radar coverage, blind spots that Moscow's military planners never publicly acknowledged, but which had quietly existed for years. Altitude drones and high-velocity missiles overwhelm the network's ability to track, prioritize, and intercept. A force that has built its reputation on technological dominance. That failure struck at the heart of its credibility. Revealed just how deep the shortcomings ran. Debris from failed interceptors was found scattered across residential districts. Of Russia's own defensive rockets may have malfunctioned mid-flight. Footage showed air defense guns firing wildly into the night, into empty sky as drones slipped through undetected. The problem wasn't just one of technology, it was systemic. Layers of command redundancy. And outdated software converged into a perfect storm of dysfunction. The Russians had built a fortress, yes, one that depended on flawless coordination. Once that coordination faltered, the system collapsed under its own complexity. Have long warned that Russia's military modernization program, though impressive on paper, suffered from uneven implementation. Corruption, misallocations, and the reliance on aging infrastructure often undermined the sophistication of new technologies. Failure made that painfully visible. Air defense grid that was supposed to represent modern military mastery now symbolized bureaucratic stagnation and overconfidence. Then an external strike, it was an exposure of internal decay. It showed the world, and perhaps even Russia itself, that the machinery of its defense was not built on strength, but on perception. As dawn approached, the Kremlin's response reflected the weight of that realization. Statements were terse, vague, and defensive. The Ministry of Defense claimed a partial success in intercepting incoming drones, raged across several districts. The contradiction between rhetoric and reality deepened public skepticism. For years, government had assured its citizens that no foreign weapon could breach Moscow's shield. That night, rattled from distant explosions and emergency sirens wailed through powerless streets, millions of Russians saw proof that those assurances were hollow. Blow was immense, not just for the people, but for the military establishment itself. Foreign governments and intelligence services took note. Monitoring the situation in real time described the event as a catastrophic systems failure. The implications went far beyond the battlefield. Air defense network could be breached so easily. What did that say about the protection of its nuclear command centers or its early warning arrays? Once seemed hypothetical suddenly felt urgent. For Russia's adversaries, this was a revelation of weakness. For its allies, a cause for concern. Deterrence that had defined Europe for decades seemed to shift ever so slightly in a single night of flame and silence. Inside Russia, began to circulate within military circles whispers of negligence, outdated protocols, and perhaps even sabotage. Internal divisions within the defense establishment have contributed to the failure. The system deliberately feeding false data or delaying responses. The Kremlin's silence on these questions only deepened suspicion. Historically, have triggered political consequences in Russia, and this one was different in scale and symbolism. The shield that once protected the capital now lay in ruins, both materially and metaphorically. Moscow's skyline under siege sent an unmistakable message: no city, no matter how fortified, is immune to the vulnerabilities it refuses to confront. Long seen as a model of discipline and precision, had been humiliated in full view of the world. Strike didn't just bypass the defenses, it dismantled the myth of Russian military infallibility. Following the final explosions was deafening, not because of what was destroyed, but because of what it revealed. Strongest armor had never been steel or circuitry, it had been belief. And tonight, that belief crumbled faster than any missile ever could. First, explosions echoed across Moscow. The city's information ecosystem fractured instantly. Within minutes, both the streets and the screens. The government's immediate instinct was to seize control of the narrative, common confidence. But the images already pouring out told another story entirely. Flames lit up the night sky. Yeah. The skyline was broken by smoke. And ordinary citizens, armed only with cell phones, became the first and most trusted reporters. The Kremlin, so accustomed to dictating reality, found itself racing to catch up to it. The truth was no longer something they could manage. It was something unfolding in real time, in millions of hands. Posts spreading faster than the state could suppress. In the first hours following the strikes, television Russian abruptly switched to pre-recorded programming. Anchors disappeared mid-broadcast, and official news agencies issued only short, worded updates referring to unidentified aerial incidents. There was no acknowledgement of damage, no mention of casualties, no hint of panic. Attempt to keep control, to hold back a tidal wave of uncertainty. But in the digital age, silence is louder than any statement. Plunged into darkness, social media illuminated the truth. Live streams from rooftops showed missiles streaking through the air, drones diving toward targets, balls erupting in the distance. The government's denial was rendered meaningless before it was even spoken. By dawn, the dissonance between the official narrative and what citizens were witnessing firsthand became impossible to ignore. Messaging apps were flooded with warnings, voice notes describing scenes of chaos, buildings shaking, alarms blaring, power grids failing. Yet on state TV, presenters sat beneath calm blue backdrops, reciting phrases like situation under control and limited technical malfunction. It was theater, and the audience knew it. The Kremlin's information machine, once so feared for its precision and discipline, seemed disoriented. They tried to downplay the attack. The more they amplified public suspicion. People could see the smoke outside their windows. No amount of scripting could rewrite that. The panic wasn't just physical. It was psychological. For decades, Passion State has cultivated an image of unbreakable authority, a guardian that shields its people from external threats and domestic uncertainty alike. That night shattered that image. Suddenly, Russians weren't just spectators of global conflicts, they were participants. The war had come home of fire and confusion. Social trust, already fragile after years of propaganda and repression, began to splinter. Silence of official channels wasn't calming. It was suffocating. In the absence of reliable information, rumor became currency and fear became contagious. Russia's most widely used communication platform transformed into a war zone of its own. Journalists and anonymous users posted real-time updates, satellite imagery, intercepted communications, even speculation about who might be behind the strikes. Some channels claimed that Western forces had launched the assault, accused Russian insiders of orchestrating a false flag operation. Every theory fed into the chaos, blurring the line between information and manipulation. For the average citizen huddled in darkness, the truth felt unattainable. All that remained was the raw, undeniable sense that something historic had broken. The idea that Moscow, heart of the world's largest nation, could be struck so deeply was enough to send a tremor through the Russian psyche. Inside the Kremlin became a matter of survival. Censors worked through the night deleting posts, blocking live streams, journalists who refused to retract footage. Yet every deletion seemed to spawn 10 new uploads. The state's old methods, silence, fear, colliding with a new reality where information moved too fast to be contained. Just that the government had lost control of the story, it had lost control of its audience. Of Moscow no longer waited for the official word. They wrote their own versions of it. The monopoly on truth had collapsed. Occasional observers watched the information war unfold with fascination. In Washington, London, and Berlin, Moscow's response to the way Western governments handle domestic crises. The contrast was stark. Leaders might speak within minutes of an attack. Russia's leadership hid behind silence. Putin's absence, especially in those first crucial hours, became symbolic. In a nation where his presence is synonymous with stability, his invisibility only deepened the sense of disarray. It was as though the Kremlin, for the first time in a generation, did not know what to say or how to say it. The fear spreading through the capital was amplified by uncertainty. With power grids failing, phone lines jammed, and no clear instructions from the authorities, Moscow's citizens resorted to instinct. They lined up at gas stations, cash, and emptied grocery shelves. The city's rhythm turned erratic, a mix of defiance and desperation. Some tried to flee, others stayed indoors, refreshing their screens for news that wouldn't come. The blackout had been both literal and informational, a dark mirror of the government's decades-long obsession with control. As the hours dragged on, Blackout revealed something profound: fear cannot be censored. Every attempt to bury the truth only made it spread faster, exposed the weakness of those who told it. The Kremlin's grip on perception, a tool it had used to shape public opinion, justify wars. Dissent was slipping through its fingers. What once took years of propaganda to build unraveled in one night of silence and fire. In the end, it wasn't just the missiles or the drones that struck Moscow. It was the collapse of credibility. Prided itself on controlling every headline and every whisper, suddenly faced a population that no longer believed its words. Blackout, meant to preserve calm, instead became a spotlight on fear. The people saw through the curtain was a government that could no longer control the story of its own strength. The streets burned, the screens flickered. The Kremlin grew heavier with every passing minute. In that silence, something shifted forever. The balance between fear and truth, authority and reality. And Moscow, once the master of the message, found itself on the other side of its own propaganda machine, drowning in the noise it had created. The moment the first reports of explosions over Moscow began circulating, shockwaves rippled far beyond Russia's borders. What happened in those few chaotic minutes was more than a local catastrophe. It was a geopolitical earthquake. In European capitals, in NATO command rooms, bunkers from Brussels to Washington, screens lit up with real-time data, the sheer audacity of the strikes, their precision of targeting Moscow itself sent analysts into overdrive. This was not just another flare up in an ongoing conflict. Demonstration that the rules of engagement in modern warfare had changed forever. The balance of power, long held together by deterrence and illusion, suddenly felt fragile again. The first official reactions from Western governments were measured, cautious, and deliberately ambiguous. Publicly, the escalation of hostilities and urged restraint, but behind closed doors, military strategists were dissecting every second of the event. The Flamingo missiles and drone formations represented a leap in coordination that few had anticipated. This wasn't random aggression, it was technological theater. Most heavily defended capital had been struck with precision, and the implications were staggering. How had a swarm of unmanned aerial vehicles, of missiles, outmaneuvered what was believed to be one of the most advanced air defense networks in the world? About Russia's failure, it was about the future of warfare. Inside NATO headquarters, analysts framed the event as a watershed moment. Moscow demonstrated the full potential of hybrid warfare, an evolving military strategy that blends conventional weaponry with cyber sabotage, infiltration, and psychological shock. It was the kind of assault designed not just to destroy, but to destabilize. By hitting symbolic and infrastructural targets simultaneously, had managed to paralyze both Moscow's military apparatus and its sense of invulnerability. This was war without invasion, conquest through confusion. Every nation watching understood that the battlefield had changed. The front lines were no longer geographical. They were systemic, digital, and psychological. In reaction was one of uneasy silence. China, Russia's strategic ally and economic lifeline amid Western sanctions, found itself in an awkward position. Chinese state media referred to the event as unfortunate escalation. Privately, however, military observers were studying the strike patterns closely. The precision, timing, and layered tactics offered lessons that could redefine modern defense doctrines. If Moscow, with its vast arsenal and technological sophistication, effectively no capital was truly safe, great powers suddenly realized they were operating in an era where dominance could be undone not by armies, but by algorithms and coordination. Also sent tremors through energy and financial markets. Within hours, oil prices surged as investors feared retaliation or regional destabilization. Energy ministers convened emergency meetings, wary of potential disruptions to pipelines or cyber intrusions into power grids. Wasn't limited to Moscow's vulnerability. It was the precedent this event set. If such a strike could cripple Russia's capital, to stop similar tactics from being used against London, Paris, or Berlin. Began warning of a global vulnerability cascade where cities worldwide would scramble to fortify infrastructure, not just against bombs, coordinated technological assaults that could disable power grids, airports, or even financial systems. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, Diplomats struggled to craft language that could acknowledge the gravity of the situation without igniting further tensions. The Russian ambassador, visibly agitated, backed actors of orchestrating a terror campaign. Western representatives, careful not to confirm or deny involvement, de-escalation while privately trading intelligence on the attack's mechanics. For all their political posturing, one reality united them. Moscow's darkness had revealed a terrifying truth about modern warfare. The next major conflict might not be fought over territory, but over control of systems, the flow of power, data, and information that underpins civilization itself. In the global media, the narrative evolved rapidly. Major news outlets ran continuous coverage, showing dramatic images of explosions lighting up the Russian skyline. The night Moscow fell silent, and the unthinkable strike. Public sentiment ranged from disbelief to fascination. Commentators compared it to Pearl Harbor, not in death toll, but in psychological impact, a single event that redefined the perception of security worldwide. The notion of Moscow as an impenetrable fortress had collapsed, and in that collapse, the world saw a glimpse of its own fragility. Intelligence agencies began quietly celebrating the insights gleaned from the incident, the data harvested from the strike. Response times, radar efficiency, communication breakdowns offered a window into Russia's defensive architecture. In geopolitical terms, the event was a goldmine. As analysts studied the failure, strategists worried about the consequences. An injured power is a dangerous one, could lash out unpredictably, both militarily and politically. The possibility of retaliatory cyber attacks or proxy strikes loomed large. That the escalation might spiral into something far more global than anyone intended. In Eastern Europe, Russia felt the aftershocks most intensely. In Warsaw, Riga, and Vilnius, air raid drills were hastily conducted, urged citizens to remain vigilant while intelligence services worked around the clock to secure digital infrastructure, had shattered not only Russian confidence, but also the illusion of regional stability. If the center of Russian power could be hit so effectively, did smaller nations have? It was a question no leader wanted to answer, yet every one of them was asking behind closed doors. Even in Washington, publicly denied any involvement, the sense of unease was unmistakable. This wasn't victory, it was revelation. The world had crossed a threshold, returning to the old assumptions of safety and deterrence. The Pentagon's analysts framed it bluntly, had expanded to include everything: power grids, satellites, media networks. Nothing was off limits anymore. The attack on Moscow wasn't merely a strike, it was a warning to every capital that the age of absolute security was over. And so, as the fires in Moscow began to dim, their glow reflected in every window of power across the world. The event had rewritten doctrines, redefined vulnerability. Even the most powerful nations that in modern warfare, the size of your arsenal that matters most, it's how quickly your lights can be turned off. As dawn broke over a city still shrouded in smoke, began to realize that what had just unfolded in Moscow would have repercussions far beyond the borders of Russia. And then missile and drone strikes had not only pierced Moscow's defenses, but had also penetrated the very idea of global stability. The immediate question was no longer who fired the missiles or why. It was what would happen next. Had been thrust into a new and unpredictable chapter where fear, misinformation, and retaliation danced on the edge of chaos. Every major power now faced the same haunting realization: this was not the end of a crisis, but the beginning of a reckoning. In the aftermath, Kremlin projected a tone of defiance. Official statements declared that Moscow's defenses had neutralized most of the threats, but satellite imagery and live videos told a different story. Flames had consumed entire blocks, energy grids had failed, and parts of the capital remained without power or communication for hours. The symbolism was devastating. Moscow had stood as a symbol of unbreakable Russian might, a city that had survived invasions, sanctions, and political upheavals. Now, to its knees not by an army, but by the silent hum of drones and the speed of precision-guided missiles. Humiliation broadcast to billions, and the world was watching how Russia would respond. What made the event even more volatile was the uncertainty surrounding the perpetrators. In the fog of war, rumors became weapons. Social media exploded with theories and doctored videos. Some claimed the attack came from Ukrainian forces with Western backing. suggested internal sabotage or rogue elements within Russia's own ranks. The Kremlin's media machine moved swiftly to control the narrative as part of a broader Western plot to destabilize Russia. Yet even within the state-controlled channels, an unspoken acknowledgement that Moscow had been caught off guard. And when a government built on the illusion of invincibility begins to crack, sends tremors through every level of its society, the Russian public's reaction was as complex as it was emotional. In some neighborhoods, gathered in silence, staring at the night sky that had been lit by explosions only hours before. In others, frustration boiled over, buzzed with anger at officials who had promised total protection. Families demanded answers. Platforms, usually tightly censored, became hotbeds of outrage. It wasn't just about fear, it was about betrayal. For many Russians, this attack had shattered the last thread of trust in a government that had long insisted it could protect them from external threats. Rupture was perhaps the most dangerous aftermath of all because it transformed a national tragedy into a political crisis. Internationally, thick with tension, Western leaders issued careful statements emphasizing peace and restraint while monitoring every Russian move. Intelligence agencies tracked troop movements, cyber traffic, and communications from Moscow's defense command centers, overreaction that could ignite something catastrophic. Military analysts debated whether the Kremlin would retaliate directly, launch a cyber onslaught, its operations in other regions as a show of force. The stakes were enormous. A single miscalculation, a drone misidentified, intercepted in the wrong airspace, could turn a regional flashpoint into a global confrontation. Diplomats were working overtime, not just to contain Russia's fury, but to prevent the next spark from catching fire. In the global markets, chaos reigned. Oil prices spiked overnight. Currencies trembled and investors braced for uncertainty. Moscow Stock Exchange halted trading as panic rippled through financial systems. Russia, as a secure energy supplier, a cornerstone of the world's economy, had been shaken. Suddenly, pipelines, refineries, and data centers looked like potential targets in the new age of warfare. Energy ministers across Europe and Asia convened emergency sessions, stabilized prices, but to reassess their strategic vulnerabilities. Strikes had done more than damage a city. They had struck at the world's economic heart. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Pence communities were piecing together fragments of information. Intercepted before the attack suggested an intricate coordination involving satellite jamming, advanced drone swarming, and electronic camouflage, unlike anything previously recorded. And synchronization implied a level of sophistication achievable only by state-backed actors or elite military research units. That realization sent chills down the spines of policymakers everywhere. If such a strike could be executed with this level of finesse, the global defense playbook needed rewriting. Every assumption about deterrence, about defense depth, had been rendered obsolete overnight. In the world of media and public opinion, the event became an inflection point. Major news networks competed to frame the narrative, some focusing on the humanitarian cost, others on the geopolitical stakes. On talk shows and digital platforms, whether this was an act of war or a prelude to one. And as the hours stretched into days, the psychological warfare intensified. Social media feeds blurring the line between truth and fabrication, the own-provoked attack, while Western commentators questioned whether Moscow had brought this upon itself through years of aggression. Perception was as fierce as the physical strike itself, and in that battle, truth became collateral damage for ordinary citizens around the world. On Moscow felt like a warning siren. In New York, London, Berlin, and Tokyo, conversations turned to preparedness. How safe were their own cities from drone swarms or cyber offensives? Governments quietly issued advisories to critical sectors to strengthen digital defenses and emergency protocols. It wasn't paranoia, it was recognition. The attack had revealed that in the modern era, offers no protection and power offers no immunity. The vulnerabilities of one capital had suddenly become the vulnerabilities of all. By the end of the week, had entered a strange new equilibrium, a fragile pause between outrage and retaliation. Moscow's streets were still scarred, smoke still hung in the air, but reconstruction had begun, both physically and politically. As President Putin appeared on state television vowing vengeance and resilience, the message to the world was clear: Russia would not let this pass unanswered. But what that response would look like and how far it would reach, no one could say. The silence that followed his speech was chilling, a silence filled with dread and the faint, undeniable echo of war drums on the horizon. Because when a superpower's capital burns illuminate more than a skyline, they reveal the fault lines of an entire world, order trembling beneath the weight of what comes next. Sits in darkness, the rest of the world is watching closely, holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next. Because tonight, myth of invincibility has been shattered. That most ruled empires has learned that even the most powerful can fall silent under the roar of drones and the flash of fire. I'm Rachel Maddow. Joining me tonight, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, history is not just written by those who win wars, survive the moments that change them forever.